Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. I hope you are staying safe. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about persuasive speaking. So, this is the persuasive speaking chapter. And the goal of this chapter, the goal that you will walk away with knowing is what is persuasive speech, using audience analysis to develop your argument, some ethics, and organizing the speech. Now, one thing that you're going to keep in mind is that your persuasive speech, a lot of it has to do with how good and how strong your delivery is, how good your presentation is when it comes down to your hand gestures, your movement, all of those small factors that are not as important in other speeches as they are in persuasive speeches, because people are very much persuaded by a strong by a strong delivery. So for your persuasive speeches, you're going to have to work extra hard to make sure that your speeches are using those kind of delivery cues. So I know it may be a little bit challenging when you're doing it through video, but make sure that movement and that hand gestures and those things are coming out for this speech, especially. So let's start from the beginning. Now, I have a question for you. Is an organized speech plus evidence, does that equal persuasion? And I want you to think about it for a moment before I give you the answer. Does having organization and good supporting materials, is that equal good and effective persuasion? Well, no, not really. It's not enough. There's a few other ingredients that you need to have that we will talk about. And it's really easy uh, to kind of sink the ship, as if we're talking about the Titanic. Think about the Titanic. It was, the largest boat made at the time, and they were confident that the Titanic can go through anything. And it had an encounter with an iceberg, and as a result of its encounter with an iceberg, it sunk, and it was one of the biggest tragedies at the time. And you've probably heard the story. You've probably watched the movie, but the thing is that what sunk the ship was the fact that they were overconfident and they weren't aware that the iceberg is a very powerful thing, in that in fact not 90% of an iceberg is below the surface. So 10% of the iceberg shows at the top, and then 90% of the iceberg is below where you can't see it. And that's how the ship got really damaged and got ripped up, because of that 90% at the bottom. So let's get into what persuasive speaking is. The goal of persuasive speaking is you're trying to influence beliefs, attitudes, actions. You're trying to influence people's perspective. So, for example, if you're trying to do a persuasive speech on pollution and decreasing pollution, your goal is to actually create change. So the outcome of a persuasive speech is always about having some sort of an action attached to it. So there's always an action attached to a persuasive speech. So speakers they can either try to strengthen audience commitment, they try to either weaken audience commitment, or advocate audience action. So for example, if your audience is sympathetic towards you, if it's sympathetic towards your cause, then the audience will then your goal is to have the audience be strengthened in their commitment, because if the audience already likes you, you don't have to really persuade them to be on your side. They already are on your side. Your goal is to just get them to be much more passionate. And there's the law of 1,000 followers. So like if you can get 1,000 people to really support and believe your cause and really be passionate about it, not like 1,000 people who like follow you on Instagram or something, but like 1,000 people who are passionate, who are really really committed to your cause. If you can get that many people following you, then you can actually have a little bit of a movement and have an impact on the society around you. Now, another one is weaken audience commitment. Now, this weakening audience commitment usually has to do with audiences um, that are hostile. So if your audience is hostile towards you, you probably don't have a chance of getting them to buy into what you're saying and like act on it. But chances are that you are able to get them to not be so committed to their position. So another goal is to weaken audience commitment, and then advocate audience action. This goes both for neutral audiences and sympathetic audiences. What you want is you want to get the audience to actually act upon it. So to sign a petition, so on and so forth. So 1 and 3 is for neutral and sympathetic audiences. So strengthen audience commitment and advocate audience action is dedicated to sympathetic and neutral listeners. So that's the goal. So in the pictures here below, if you look at it here, strengthen commitment, I now feel more sympathy for the homeless, right? So there's this belief that is a little bit has been shifted and changed now that you've learned a little bit about the issue of homelessness. Another one is I was wrong to think that the homeless don't want to work. That's the weakened commitment. So there's a person who probably was a hostile audience who was against that topic, and now they're a little bit more into the topic. And then I'm taking action. So that's the promoting action, is you're getting the audience, like your sympathetic audience, to actually go out there and volunteer at a soup kitchen. So that's what the speakers attempt to do when they are speaking to an audience. Now, remember, you're not going to be able to get every single person every single time, but you're going to be able to sway a lots of people if you are persuasive and if you are engaging, and if you are and if you use a strong delivery and you use good facts and good information, you are able to use you are going to be able to influence a large amount of people. So now let's talk about advocating policy, facts, and values. So facts, values, and policy claims. So there's things that you can make that's a claim. Claim is a statement or an idea that you're making. It's an argument that you are communicating. So number one is a fact claim. Something is either true or false. Whether or not something is true or false, that's a fact claim. That's when you're advocating whether or not something is accurate or inaccurate. So for example, does smoking cause cancer? So does smoking cause cancer? And that's been a debate. In the 1950s, doctors actually prescribed cigarettes to moms, which is actually double the trouble, because the moms would smoke the cigarettes around the little kids, and so the little kids who have not a fully developed respiratory system, they would be exposed to the cigarette smoke. So it was actually devastating. So during that time, though, they actually said it was actually maybe not good for the lungs, but it wasn't bad for the lungs, and the doctors prescribed those things. Not like here's an official prescription for a bag of cigarettes, but they would tell the moms, oh, you can smoke a cigarette, to calm down or to relax a little bit. So another one is the value claim. It offers whether judgment is right or wrong, whether something is right or wrong. So the previous one was, does smoking cause cancer? It's a fact claim. Does it do it? We can go back and look at the way that cancer develops. We can look at cell mutation. We could look at what happens when you inhale smoke with all of those compounds, and come to a conclusion whether it's true or not true. Now, a value claim is whether or not something should be or shouldn't be. So a value claim would be equal work for equal pay, or equal pay for equal work. It's this idea that should you pay people the same amount of money for the same amount of work. And this is definitely something that a lot of people would say is important, because they would say that, yeah, absolutely, if you're doing the same kind of work, you should get paid the same amount of money, and that would be a just system. However, where it gets muddy or where it gets weird is, what if you have equal hours but not equal pay? So for example, somebody who's working at Starbucks, pulling shots, making shots of espresso for people, or making lattes, or those kinds of things, and they're working and they're making minimum wage, and then the CEO of Starbucks is making millions of dollars, and making, they've done the statistics, and they found that the CEOs could make up to 1,000 times more. Let me say that again. They make up to 1,000 times more than their employees. And so that's when it comes down to the question of justice. Is that fair that CEOs, yes, they do have complicated jobs, but they don't work 1,000 times more? Now, can you say that the job is 1,000 times more complicated? It's up for debate, but it's definitely a debatable issue. And then we have the policy claims. Now, the policy claims have to do with advocating action by organizations or audience members, and then policy claims are saying this is what you should do. And this is actually a big consideration or a big debate currently going on, because we have the presidential elections coming up, and the presidential elections are all about the policy claims. They're all about establishing who should be president. And so who should be president is going to be determined and decided by people who vote. So when it comes down to voting, and when it comes down to the electorate public, which is us, um, and the electoral college too. But when it comes down to it, we decide based on what we see. So policy claims are all about getting people to act, getting people to vote, and lots and lots and lots of money goes into this. In the United States, there's, the candidate spends, some candidates spends hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising and on, getting the posters out and getting the, vote for me signs out and pins and all of that, and the campaign and the campaign managers. There's companies that specialize in getting the understanding people's preferences, and there's companies specializing in how you should talk and how you should speak to an audience to get the maximum effect. It's definitely a whole industry, and it's definitely something that it requires a lot, like it's the big machine that requires a lot of gears and a lot of things to run. So that's policy claims. Now we're also talking about audiences and what their disposition is. So one thing that's important is that there is audience disposition. So for example, is it okay for does the audience think something is okay? So you want to know whether the audience is hostile, sympathetic, or neutral towards your position. So that's very important for you to establish that from the beginning, is to understand where does your audience stand on your issues. And that's where audience analysis comes in. Remember, in audience analysis, what you do is you analyze your audience to try to get a better understanding of where your audience stands and what it believes on certain topics. Now, you may not know that, like there's certain things that you may not know, for example, people's political affiliation, people's religious beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. There's things and factors you may never know. So you're kind of just venturing out into deep waters there, because you might not know exactly what to say based on the information that you don't have. So you just kind of have to go out there and speak in a way that tries to appeal to as many people as possible, or not. Or you could just say, you know what, I'm appealing only to these people, and that's it. So this is what happens in elections during the Republican and Democratic nominations. What you'll see is at the beginning of the cycle, when people are starting to get their voice heard and they're starting their bid for presidency, they'll start off, if they're Republican, and they'll start off saying very Republican things, like very Republican things, and their positions are very Republican. Same thing with the Democrat. Their position is very Democrat, very much focused on appealing to the Democratic sensibilities. But then as the election continues, and then as the election progresses, what happens is that they start to become less Democratic and Republican, and they start becoming more centrist, or more towards the middle. They start to kind of even out the edges, and the Republican starts to sound a little bit more Democratic, and the Democratic candidates start to sound a little bit more Republican. And that goal is so that when you're right there, right before elections, you are appealing to both sides of the spectrum. And so that's how it tends to work. So if you pay attention closely this election cycle, you'll notice that that's what they're doing. And it's it's a little bit, maybe a little bit of an ethical dilemma, as we're gonna talk about it in future lectures. But it's definitely something that presidential candidates do often. Now, you also want to talk about latitude of acceptance and latitude of rejection. So there's people are willing to do certain things and not do certain things. And so when a person is willing to do a certain thing, that's the latitude of acceptance. If a person is not willing to do a certain thing, that's a latitude of rejection. And then the boomerang effect is when you go out there and you say something that um, that offends the audience, or that the audience stands against, and the audience is actually against you more for you speaking. So you go out there, you speak, you do your presentation, you communicate your ideas, And instead of the audience being more open to you and liking you more, they actually like you less. So if we're talking about latitude of acceptance and latitude of rejection, there's things that people are willing to do and not willing to do, right? So for example, let's talk about what kind of an animal would you, if it was, annoying you, would you kill? So I know that sounds kind of like bad right now, but let me elaborate so that you understand. So for example, if you're sitting there and there's a mosquito that's there, and that's flying and buzzing around you, and is just there, like really just pestering you, most of you would probably kill that mosquito, right? But what if it's nearby, near you, like a spider that's just kind of like, minding its own business, and it's not really bothering you? Are you going to kill it, right? So some of you would say, well, it depends. Is it a black widow spider? Is it a safety issue? Those kinds of things. Now, what if it's, your neighbor's dog, right? So it's yapping away, right? You probably would not even think in your mind to do that. So in your latitude of acceptance, you would probably kill a mosquito. You would think about the spider, and then in your latitude of rejection, you would never, harm your neighbor's dog. Hopefully you wouldn't. So that's where latitude of acceptance, latitude of rejection comes in. Now, what you want to do is you want to appeal to audiences. You want to engage them at the level of what their interests are. So the first one is the aspect of needs. Now, there's a famous psychologist named Abraham Maslow, and he created this Maslow hierarchy of needs. And he said that basic needs need to be met before higher level needs become more important. So he said you're not going to be able to function at a higher level or have higher level needs, your interest in your higher level needs there, if your bottom level, your fundamental, your kind of at the bottom of the pyramid level needs are met. So you have to meet your fundamental needs or your functional needs before you meet your more psychological self-actualization needs. So for example, your physiological needs, if you are hungry or starving, you're not going to be able to pay attention. Same thing if you like really have to go to the bathroom, right? Like if you're sitting there in lecture and you really have to go, and the teacher's droning on and on and on, and you're like, can you stop talking? I need to really go. Let's have this class over. If your physiological needs, same thing with air, like you can't live without air, water, food, um, those kinds of things, those needs, if those needs are not met, you're not going to be able to concentrate on the task at hand. Then after you have your physiological needs met, you need to have your safety needs met. You need to feel safe. You need to know that there's not like a tiger out there waiting outside, ready to jump on you, right? So you need to feel safe and secure in the location that you're at. If you don't know that whether or not your life is in danger based on the location. So for example, we're in the time of COVID-19 and the self quarantine, and the social distancing. They canceled school and they moved it to virtual instruction because of the people's safety needs. Now we also have social needs. We need people and we need each other, and we need to engage and interact and talk to each other. And if we don't, we feel a gap in our lives. We feel a sense of loneliness, we feel a sense of loss if we're not engaged with the people around us. Another one is self-esteem needs, and that has to do with how you feel about yourself. So once you have your basic physiological needs met, safety needs met, social needs met, you need to feel good about yourself. You need to feel as if who you are matters, and you need to get those kind of messages from the people around you. If people don't make you feel like you are worth it or that you are worthwhile, then that's going to have a really negative effect on your psychology. And then we also have finally self-actualization needs, and that has to do with your perspective on yourself in the bigger picture. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Am I living out my life to its ultimate and full potential? Like that's kind of the question that gets asked in the self-actualization category. So am I living my life to its full potential? What is my legacy? What am I going to leave behind this earth when I die? Those are the kinds of questions you're able to start asking yourself when all those needs are met. Now, if those bottom level needs are not met, you're not going to care about your legacy if you're starving. If you're not, don't feel safe, you're not going to care about what people think about you. If you feel like your life is in danger because you're in fight or flight mode. So that's where the Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes in. Now, another thing is values. Like values are core conceptions of what is desirable for your life and society. So this is a question of how we set up our society, and this has to do with uh, do personal freedoms, for example, trump the safety of most people. So, for example, this is a big thing that was happening, a couple of weeks ago in Florida, where people were going to the beach and enjoying the beach, but while during the quarantine time. And this was a big question during spring break, because kids would want to go out and have a good time with their friends during spring break, but they're not supposed to be going around and gathering in groups. And so that's a clash of values. That's where the values clash, where you have a tension between people, where people say this is a good thing or this is not a good thing, and this is an effective thing, this is not an effective way to live, to set up society. And we've seen some people criticize other people on social media or on the news channels, will criticize others for not valuing the safety of others by going out and unnecessarily. So that's where the question comes in. Same thing at the airports. Before 2001, before 9/11, the security at airports was not as stringent and not as strict. But then after 9/11, the security became much more strict, and that's a question of values. Do we make some people uncomfortable by having more searches of them and their possessions than and make sure that they're safe? But and obviously these are random searches. But when it comes down to it, do we do that? Do we make some people uncomfortable, or you take up their time because you're searching them, and you're trying to promote safety, but then those people may not like that. So that's where the idea of values comes in. And then benefits, listeners weigh the costs and benefits. So you want to help audiences visualize benefits. So I saw an article recently that there are people who were out there when COVID-19 was developing, and when they were telling people to social distance and to not get together, and the people didn't take it seriously, and how now they regret it, and how now that they got COVID-19, or they've seen some people from the group that they were with at the party that they were with get COVID-19, and then now all of a sudden they're like, oh no, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing. Now, I'm not trying to promote one position or the other. It's a complex issue, it's a complex topic, and it's a complex scenario right now that we're in, but it's also a useful one for example. So pretty much what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what are the costs and what are the benefits. So for example, most people would go out and go to the store to get groceries, but people probably aren't going to go out and try to go to not that they are open, but they're probably not going to be going out and socially going out to eat dinner with their friends like they usually do. Because on the one hand, eating is a fundamental basic need, but maybe the social needs, remember we're talking about the hierarchy of needs, the physiological need of eating, people will go out there and risk their health to get food, but they're not going to risk their health to fulfill their social needs to get together with their friends. Now, we can talk about ethics and organization. We can talk about how to organize information. So, for example, one thing you can do is you can use a two-sided argument, and that's where you voice your listener's objection to your thesis and refute it with evidence and reasoning. So, for example, one common one in the vaccines world, there's discussion and debate. Do vaccines, are they harmful or are they dangerous? And I've heard presentations and speeches where people have done a fairly good job of saying, what, a lot of people think that vaccines can cause some mental disorders in children, like autism, or they can cause some harm, and actually and actually do more harm than good. But that was actually faulty studies, and then they would go and explain how those studies are ineffective. So the debate continues, the debate rages on. Do vaccines cause health issues for people? Do they cause significant damage to children? So on and so forth. But a good debater will be aware of what is against them. A good debater will be aware of what kind of criticisms or what kind of arguments or ideas are leveled against their position, and then they're going to be able to turn around and combat those arguments head on and effectively. So there's peripheral versus core beliefs. What you have to remember is that when it comes down to it, people have beliefs that they're peripherally attached to, and then their beliefs that are at their core. So this is, think of a single issue voter. A voter will just vote on whether or not abortion is legalized, is it pro-life or pro-choice, either side, and they'll vote on it. Whatever administration says their position, they vote on that position. So that's a core belief. They believe that belief. It's very close. It's near and dear to their heart, and so they stick to those beliefs very strongly. Now, peripheral belief is something that they're not as attached to. So, for example, they may not be as attached to funding for local libraries. So they're not going to be they're not going to be as impacted by that presentation. They might say, okay, I agree, and I am influenced by it, but then when they hear a presentation on their position, they're much more engaged and much more passionate about the position that the speaker has on the issue at hand. Now, you also want to research facts. You want to have good information, good data, note biases, figure out who's biased where. So, for example, if a farmer receives government subsidies, and subsidies means that government gives them money to grow their crops, even if they don't necessarily sell them, because that's how I understand subsidies. But usually they still are able to sell them. But it's an asset. It helps the farmers out. It subsidizes. It takes care of some of their financial costs. So they're much more likely, the farmers, to do what the government wants them to do, because they're getting their funding from the government. A lot of researchers, when you go out there and you're like, yes, I found a really good source, and the source is very credible. Well, what is it? Because what you want to do is you want to also be aware of who is funding the research that is being done, because a lot of times different companies and different businesses will fund the research, and when the different businesses fund the research, then what happens is the research may end up being biased. And then attribute your research. So give credit where credit is due, show where you got your information. And a lot of you are, pretty much all of you have done a good job of giving me your works cited and telling me where you got your research from. So make sure to not forget that important factor, that you're giving credit where credit is due. Now, fact claims. So we're going to talk about a couple of different kinds of claims. So you could have causal claims when you argue one thing causes another. And so, for example, one of the big arguments that is happening is whether or not this COVID-19 crisis, if you can call it that, no, you can probably call it that. What is it going to do to our economy? Is it going to have a strong cause and effect scenario where we're going to have a recession? So is our economy going to tank? Is it going to go down as a result of this COVID-19? Now, comparison is when you want to claim that two things are similar or different. And you've probably heard a lot about whether or not this is similar to the 1918 Spanish influenza, because I think there's like 100 million people died. And so some people are trying to make the comparison of, is COVID-19 going to be like the Spanish influenza of the early 20th century? And we're still yet to see. It's not looking like it's going to be as bad or that bad, but it's bad. It's bad in and of itself. And then there's the categorical pattern. Each main point reflects a different reason for why your fact claim is true. So, for example, you create a category and you show, okay, so this is a reason, and this is a reason, and then this is a reason, And this is a reason why your fact claim is true. So you're creating this hierarchy. So for example, if you say vaccines are beneficial, you say they're beneficial because they prevent, they first of all, they help the bodies build antibodies against negative negative pathogens. It increases your body's defense system. It makes sure you don't get as sick when your body is actually exposed to a pathogen, or it can completely prevent the sickness in its completion. So that's where your categorical pattern comes in. You're having these reasons that show up and that prove why your fact claim is true. And now value claims, for example, you have the criteria application. So you establish a standard for the value judgments you are making, and then you apply those standards to the subject of your thesis. So for example, you have to establish the criteria and then apply it to what it is that you're presenting. So for as an illustration, think about what would make a good pet. So you would say, a good pet would be someone or something that I can pet. It's some no, maybe not pet, maybe pet. All right. So it's a good pet would be someone that can or something that I can interact with. Some animal that I can interact with. It's an animal that has some emotional intelligence. It's an animal that recognizes me. It's an animal that feels and that has some sort of a cognitive function, right? Like you're not gonna have a pet as a cockroach, right? It's not very functional as a pet. There's not a lot you can do for it or with it. So criteria application, you could say these are the qualities that I want in a pet, and then you would say, well, here's the animals that fulfill that. So the animals that have some sort of an emotional intelligence, some mental intelligence, and that have feelings and that can recognize you and that you can interact with, those would be things like cats and dogs, and I don't know what else. Maybe a python, maybe a snake. I don't know. But that's where criteria application comes in. And then categorical pattern is similar to the fact claim. It's when listeners understand each point's relevance to the claim. So you're saying that, for example, what are you looking for in a good car? And you're looking for price. You're looking for good gas mileage. And you're looking for reliability. Those kinds of things. And then an example also, advanced driver training courses are beneficial. And why are they beneficial? Well, they are beneficial because advanced driver training courses, they teach you how to handle yourself on the road. They actually decrease your insurance premiums. They also give you a stronger sense of confidence in your driving ability, right? Those could be some categories that apply to why advanced driver training courses are beneficial. And then we have the organizing policy claims. We have the organizational structure. So you have the motivated sequence, and that's where you get somebody's attention. You show them their need. You show the satisfaction, visualization, and action. So, for example, you capture somebody's attention and say, "Who here wants to be able to have an affordable car that also has a zero impact on the environment, has a low carbon footprint on the environment, or does not emit pollution?" Most people will be like, okay, that you capture people's attention, and you could say then the second thing is, here's the need. We need that because our air is becoming more and more polluted, and the pollution is just growing, and cars are one simple way to decrease the amount of pollution that's happening. Now, the satisfaction here is, how do you satisfy that need? Well, here is a car that actually fulfills those needs, that actually fulfills the needs that we are talking about. And here's a Tesla, right? Tesla Model 3, I think, is their cheapest model. But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. And then visualization. Imagine yourself driving guilt-free through the street, knowing that what your driving does is it has no negative impact on the environment. And then action. What you should do is you should sign up for a lease or sign up for a test drive, or actually make the decision and buy yourself a Tesla. And then you also have a problem cause solution pattern, where you show that a problem exists, you show what the cause is, and then you create a solution for that thing. So for example, in with the COVID-19 virus because it's more transmissible. Um, and it spreads more easily. What you have is you have people say, okay, the problem is that it spreads so quickly. So what is the why is it like that? Well, because it's the way that the pathogen functions. So then how do we solve it? Well, we should wear masks, we should stay at home, we should self quarantine, so on and so forth. So I realized there was a lot of COVID-19 examples here, but it was relevant to our topic since that's what we've been talking about. So that kind of wraps it up. We talked about persuasion. We talked about how persuasion functions, about being able to read your audience and being able to engage your audience. Uh, uh, so for your persuasive speech, what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to be looking for a strong delivery. So I want to make sure I want to see you doing all of those things that are in the rubric that is required. That you're moving around, you're providing eye contact, you're patting the audience, all of those kinds of things. And then please do make sure to look those up. If you have any questions, any concerns, contact me. You have my contact information. I on my laptop in office hours. I'm during all times of day. I'm on my laptop. So please let me know if you're confused about anything or you need clarifications or guidance on anything. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And let's have a good one. Bye bye.